without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers this evening. I'm going to start with, firstly, Rina Anand, who is an equality and leadership trainer. We also have Dan Rao, who is a trustee chair of a local governing board and assistant head teacher. We have Callum Perry, who is a governor in his local school. We've got Abaladi Adunzi, who is from the Black Governors Network. And we finally, last but not least, we have Elizabeth Huard, who is also a governor in our local school. Throughout tonight's session, our panelists will share their experiences with you in a bid to help you, feel knowledgeable about what good practice in this sector looks like from a diversity point of view, reflect on the practice that happens in your school, so asking you to think about what you can do and what you can take back and empower your schools to do. We're going to hopefully leave you feeling empowered and inspired to take positive action to improve or enhance your practice in your school. Throughout tonight's session, as I've already outlined, I will work to ensure that your questions that come in are answered as we unpack the discussion. So the first question I'm going to ask all of the panelists to answer before we then get into the meat of the discussion. First of all, diversity is a broad concept. What does it mean to you? And I'm going to ask Rina to start.
Thank you, Adrian. So to me, diversity is a very multifaceted concept that extends way beyond just surface level differences and really looks at the rich tapestry of human experience, backgrounds, perspective, and attributes. And it's about recognizing and celebrating the unique qualities and characteristics of every individual, whether that's related to their race, their ethnicity, their age, their sexual orientation, their abilities, cultural background, socioeconomic status, and so much more. But actually, it goes even deeper than that still, and beyond visible attributes, and embraces the diversity of thought, ideas, beliefs, and experiences that people bring to the table, and acknowledging that every person's own life journey has shaped their viewpoint in some way, and that it's the variation of that perspective and viewpoint that actually enriches our mutual collective understanding and helps to drive innovation.
Thank you, Rina. I'm going to move across to Karina, as I can see you, and across to Elizabeth.
Well, I'm just going to build on what I think has just been a brilliant answer, which is I'm fully in agreement. I think diversity is all about a range of different backgrounds, perspectives, and experience. I quite agree. It's not all about representation of who we are in our characteristics. It's also about a range of different viewpoints and perspectives, and that's why it's important at board level, because the board diversity is all about how different contributors at the board can feed in a way that works as an antidote mindset. So we're talking about working with diversity in a way that challenges and embraces and widens the perspective of the board as a collective. And just to add, I'm so happy that we are talking about board diversity in school governance, but also that we're talking about it as diversity. We're not sort of wrapping it up as a slogan. We're not saying, oh, it's EDI. We are doing just what we're doing here and unpacking what it means. I think that's so important, and so important to be done locally.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I wanted to hold on to that last comment that you made there. We're going to unpack that as we go through. So that's a brilliant segue. So thank you so much for your contribution there. We'll move down the screen to Callum.
Well, it's getting harder and harder, isn't it, as everybody contributes to add something new to the mix. I think I would echo what's been said already, in that diversity for me means being able to draw on a range of people's experiences and voices. When we think about how knowledge is constructed, we need to consider how in a new era of society, where we need to become more reflective of society's wider interests and needs and demands, how our knowledge is constructed, and that demands us to think about multiple voices, multiple experiences, whether it be around race and gender, whether it be around class and understanding our own biases and privileges, which I'm sure we'll come back to throughout this discussion, which I think is really important for boards. But I think also diversity really allows us to become more critical when we're thinking about being accountable for boards. And although I echo what Elizabeth said around EDI, I definitely think we will probably want to unpick equity and equality and the differences between the two. And for me, diversity allows us to think about how we strive for equity rather than equality, and thinking about how we are more representative as a foundation, as kind of boards and schools and leaders and organisers to help strive for that equity rather than equality. So I'm sure we'll pick apart some more of those terminologies and some more of those ideas. But for me, diversity really allows us to be more critical and more self-reflective about how we can improve and strive for equity in society and be better reflective of society, particularly when we think about board composition.
Wonderful, thank you, Callum. I'm hopeful that people can hear me better now. I did see a message come in that my microphone quality wasn't great, so hopefully that's picked up and that's a little bit better now. I've changed it over. So I'm going to go over to Abaladi. So please add to the discussion. Apologies, Dan, you're going to draw the short straw on this one.
Yes, so similar to what has been echoed already, I think diversity for me is just understanding that everyone is different and we can learn so much from other people and from the experiences they have, and just to foster that discussion and, you know, how the discussion can challenge groupthink and conformity, and we're seeing areas in which we can make change.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I know it's getting harder as we get down the group now. So Dan, please feel free to wrap up as best as you can.
That is a real challenge to add to everyone's comments, which are so good and rich. I suppose with a governance hat on, I think it's with diversity, it's making sure that it reflects the community that we serve. It's making sure that both in terms of staff and in terms of students and our geographical locations, and making sure that students can see themselves reflected at all levels of an organisation and they can identify as part of that community. And I think without board diversity, just if we flip it on its head, then we lack accountability to those responsible, and we also lose opportunity in terms of strategic vision setting and goal setting in each and every area of the school. And I suppose in that strategic leadership sense, setting the culture of the school is so important to make sure that it is diverse at absolutely every level. And I think passion for this is driven by the entire board and not just the chair. I think where you see a rep for EDI, like Elizabeth was saying, when we start branding it as EDI and we start hiding it, then we lose the efficacy of what we're talking about when we talk about diversity. So I think it needs to be driven by the entire board, and diversity leads to a dynamic board that can respond to any barrier that pupils might face. For I don't know, an example that we've had in my context is decolonising the English curriculum. And therefore we needed some, board input on that was really, really powerful because it came from a range of people who had explored differences in their secondary education and felt different listening to the same text. And so it is so multifaceted, and as Rena said earlier, and it goes so much deeper than that veneer that we could talk about, like Elizabeth said. So.
Wonderful, thank you. You didn't do a bad job considering you drew the short straw of summing that up really well, Dan. So thank you for that. So I'm going to continue with you, Dan, because you kind of touched into the next question that I've got for the panel, is why is board diversity so important? I know you started to answer that, so please continue in a little bit of a deeper vein for us.
Yeah, so I think board diversity, I think it is a dynamic board that is able to respond to all sorts of issues that arise in the school, because we need to understand the context of our students, of our local area, of our parents, and because if our parents are coming from, for example, single parent families, or we have a small percentage of Black families in a school and aren't represented at board level, then it's not doing them justice. And I think at board level, the best example that I've had recently is, for example, the Senko at the school that I teach is hugely passionate about SEND because he's got personal experience with family members who have special educational needs, and that's what drove him into the career path. We had a SEND governor who was the best informed on SEND, so was put there in that place to keep him to account. And that didn't really fuel the dynamism that board diversity should. It didn't have the passion at all levels of the organisation that we should be aiming at. And I think if we don't have that, then we're not able to hold senior leaders and head teacher to account on those things. We're not able to be representative of our schools and celebrate strengths and differences in the same way at every level of the organisation. And I think that there just needs to be, a metric beyond a skills audit for appointing governors. We need to think, this new person, are they adding something over and above the skills of the rest of the governors? What does it look like as a cohesive governing body? Because you can have a group of different people on a board, or you can have a diverse board where people work together to lead the culture of a school. And so I think a diverse board can respond to change, but strategically leads together an organisation.
Thank you, Dan. And there was a lot to take there, and I'm still processing some of what you said. So there was so much wisdom and richness in that response. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to process that, and I'm going to pass over to Elizabeth, but with a little bit of a caveat of, Dan talked a lot about the visual diversity that we can see. I want you to pick up a little bit on something that you said in your first answer, where you talked about some of the things that in terms of the diversity that we can't actually always see. So if you could contribute some of that into your answer, that would be amazing.
Yeah, certainly. So I think this is crunch, actually. It's a crunch issue, and it's all about board effectiveness, which is another way of saying fundamental to this is how self-aware is a board. Now, I think Dan's just touched on a couple of points where we can see that, where perhaps we haven't got the right mix of, link governors or governor roles that quite meet the needs of the school, or maybe don't even meet the needs of the governor or the board. To get it right, I absolutely agree. This isn't a skills audit that we just fill in a form and think, oh, well, that job's done. We got 4s and 5s in this and 3s in that. To get this right, it is much more about the board knowing each other as individuals, and that runs right the way through to recruitment, induction, succession planning, looking at how the dynamics in each meeting work, and looking at how roles are allocated. And within that, I think the diverse board has to have the self-confidence, the self-belief, the self-awareness, and the space to be able to watch itself. And that's not all about how the chair works. Obviously, the chair is a linchpin in all this, but it's about how everyone contributes. And particularly, and I think this is really important, it's about how newcomers are welcomed. So it's this runs right the way through to recruitment. It runs even before recruitment. It runs to the point where roles are being filled. It's all about the board constantly self-evaluating and openly discussing, who are we, how are we working, who have we got on the board, what are we missing, what are we looking for, what do we want to attract in, and then when we attract in new skills, how do we make people welcome so that we keep functioning as a board. And it's not easy, as we'll all know, in school governance, because often there will be churn. People coming and going, there will be boards self-refreshing. So I entirely agree that we've got colleagues who've said there needs to be constant commitment to make this work, and everyone needs to be brought in, I think, to the effort.
Fantastic.
Adrian, add a point, I, while it just comes to me. It's just building on the brilliant answers from Elizabeth and Dan. There is, yes, we have to look at the community that we're in and make sure that the board is reflective. But I think equally, we have to look at our community and see which communities are not reflected
Mm.
and bring those people in, and do it in a very deliberate way. Because, you know, I mean, there's a UCL research paper that says 46% of schools have no Black, Asian or minority ethnic staff whatsoever. You know, if you are in, you know, homogeneity breeds groupthink. It's an environment where you can think, well, it doesn't really apply to us here, diversity, wherever we are. And actually, I would say the onus is arguably even greater to make sure that you have those different voices from all the different perspectives in that room, because otherwise you're really narrowing the breadth of what you're teaching children. And, you know, I think every school at the moment, much like ours, will be weaving sustainability into everything. And what is diversity if it's not sustainability? Which is essentially, you know, maintaining and enhancing the well-being of our current and future generations. And that, yes, it includes our environment and our planet and the trees, but it also means social sustainability. It also means emphasizing the well-being of our people and our communities, so that we can create societies where people can lead fulfilling lives and look out for one another and sustain and be sustainable. So I think as much as, it was just to really build on that point, that as much as it's important to make sure that even the marginalized or minoritized groups within our communities are represented, so much so, yeah, we should also do the same for people that we don't see anywhere.
That's wonderful, Rena. And without you knowing it, that's a brilliant segue into my next question that I'm going to start with Abalede for. In your eyes, what is a diverse board?
A diverse board is a board that encompasses different characteristics, so different age groups, race, religion, and also different educational backgrounds as well, and like socioeconomic backgrounds. I think that's really important, because I think that's an area that may be slightly overlooked, because people tend to think, oh, I don't have XYZ qualification, I don't have anything to contribute to this board, and I won't be effective on that, which is actually not the case. It's having the diversity and the differences in socioeconomic backgrounds, educational backgrounds, that actually help with the board, because you can look at it from different perspectives and different aspects, because everyone's experience is different, and you can bring that experience to the forefront and take away from it as well. So that's...
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. And the same question across to you, Callum.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Abalede has said. I think what's really difficult as a board is to understand, I think, when you become a bit of an echo chamber. So I think quite a lot of the time we see ex-head teachers, retired teachers, individuals that have worked in the education sector for a long time, often in their community, with their experiences, with their upbringings, join boards. And that's great, because that really helps to enhance our understanding and the picture of how things change over time. But what it can do, I think, is lead to patterns of behaviour and thinking that cause us to revisit and approach solutions in particular ways which might not consider other perspectives and more innovative solutions. So I think that's one of the issues that we have when we don't see diverse boards. And so it's really important that a board is self-reflective of its own privileges, biases, and ways of thinking. So, I mean, for example, I have the privilege of working with the 2 local Norfolk secondary schools in a predominantly very white British community. And one of my schools, one of the sixth formers came up to me once and said, you know, I really enjoy being at the school, but when I'm learning, I'm not seeing anybody in my curriculum that reflects myself as a person of colour. And that's nothing that I think our board could really have thought about reactively when considering reports about curriculum, because we hadn't understood the lived experiences of some of those students. And we'd assumed that because lots of teachers had taught in that area, they were predominantly white and British, that actually they weren't conversations that we needed to have. So I think that exemplifies why we need to be more reflective about the policies, the language that we're using when we're talking about recruiting governors into the space, when we are talking about how welcome we are, about the responsibilities of the board. And that goes right from the top of the trust communicating what it's looking for, to then us rolling out school policies or CPD and training for governors. But equally, on the other side of that, being a young governor, or probably a very young governor, below the young age demographic I came into governance at 22, that students really appreciate seeing someone that perhaps is of similar age and experience of their same generation, that understands some of the terminology that they're experiencing and using in their community. So it can have also really positive effects, and we should encourage more individuals, I think, from wider backgrounds that maybe have been to school very recently, that want to come back as an alumni and join governing boards to help their school and reshape the direction of education in their local community. We should invite them and encourage them back in. I think the board would need to be very self-reflective, though, of how its language is being used around how governance works, how welcoming they are. Again, going back to what Elizabeth said about induction packages and where we go and recruit governors, the spaces we go to, rather than expecting people to come to us and be admitted into our space, actually going out into those local communities and seeing maybe what skills that those individuals can bring. So self-reflection, I think, is really important, and it contributes to board diversity, and having a more diverse board, I think, makes us more self-reflective in turn as well.
Wonderful, Callum, and so much depth in that answer, and you've kind of actually answered the next question that I had prepared. So fortunately, our delegates have bailed me out a little bit here. So I'm gonna put out to the whole panel, and the first question is: what can be done to improve diversity in economic backgrounds?
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Do you mean how do you attract governors who are from perhaps lower socioeconomic backgrounds? Is that the question?
I think that's what the question's asking. Yes.
So I mean, I'll say maybe something quickly just to allow others to speak as well. But I think partly it's actually making it accessible. So there is a lot of paperwork that comes with governance, and that's fine. But it's also a barrier for many people, and so we've got to look at what ways can we make the role more transparent. I think people think it's a bit of a secret society sometimes as well, right? But how do people actually know who their governors are in their school? Are they walking around? Are they meeting the community? Are they meeting their children and the staff? How involved in the community are they? But to answer the question, I think there needs to be some flexibility, bearing in mind people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds may also have jobs which require them to work perhaps what I would say unsociable hours, or not your typical 9-to-5 type job. So what flexibility can you apply to enable their participation? Maybe they could be an associate governor, for example, so they're not a fully a fully adopted member of the board, but they have that flexibility around attendance, or maybe they could be aligned to a particular area for a short period of time. But there are ways to do it. It's just also having that conversation with them about their interests and what's manageable, but also being able to provide training and resources in a way that is accessible as well, not just 2-hour seminars. It can be starting off with, and I think this speaks to Elizabeth's point earlier about how you welcome people in, and actually goes even before that. How can people get to know who you are so that it's seen as something that people can see themselves contributing to, so there's some representation. So I mean, there's more I can say, but I think I better allow others to speak.
Thank you, Rini, and you raised some really pertinent points. I think the point that you raised around accessibility for people is a key one. So I always think about when it's time to recruit parent governors, and if we're trying to attract people, how flexible are we in when the meetings are held, and do we have to attend in person, because that's a whole childcare issue. And it's just thinking about the practicalities of elements like that. Dan, I could see that you were keen to answer this question as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really helpful. I think the main thing, just jumping off of Rina's point, is that there is purpose to governance, and there needs to be purpose to governance, because if especially in primary, so being part of a primary trust, sometimes parents in primary are much more involved than they are at secondary, And so they're like sort of pseudo head teachers who, you know, are really excited about certain things within the school community. And governance is such an effective way to harness that, to make sure there's passionate people, to make sure there's a link between governors and key bodies or key student leadership chambers in the school, so that you've got that direct link. Because at 6 o'clock with some crusty sandwiches with no pay and childcare issues isn't going to get, you know, it's Taylor Swift tickets are running out, but governance slots are still available. There's not that excitement about it. And I think having a common purpose together, and also, so I come from a single parent family, and had my mum wanted to be a governor, I think she'd have made a brilliant one, but I don't know what she'd have done with me and my brother at the time. So I think the accessibility in terms of having some, especially some committees on Zoom, or how we go about doing that. We've got some parent governors as part of our forum at the moment, and we are dropping those meetings into pickup time, so it's an hour or two before, because a lot of places are give, even for shift work, are making allowances so that they can come along. And for people who have you know, lower income stream, are we preparing that high quality CPD for governors like we do for school staff? Because if we do, we're upskilling in a different way as well. And are they able to see the impact of being at those meetings? Yes, if they're able to come into school. So if we prepare that accessibility, provide higher quality training, and we don't have, I really liked Callum made a point, and it just sort of reminded me of a phrase like time capsule governance. It's like, do we just have lots of people who are older and from a homogenous demographic? If so, then we're not going to move anywhere with that common purpose. So yeah, that would be, it would start with purpose, would be my thing.
Wonderful, thank you, Dan. A really thoughtful and rich answer again. Is there anyone else to contribute to that question there?
May I just say, just add to what's been said about challenging assumptions. So absolutely right to challenge assumptions about when meetings are held and what roles people run, but also could we challenge a few more assumptions around what kit people can bring? You know, do we implicitly assume that everyone can bring their own device on which they can read their governing body papers? Do we offer alternatives? Do we honestly, and I think some of this also applies to people who might want to become governors from the disabled community, do we make it difficult by wanting people to make journeys that really and truly they don't have to make if we redesign how we do things? So I think this is a wonderful example where if you start thinking about inclusive design, you could actually unpack a few barriers for, you know, more than one group, without needing to bracket any particular group into any particular sort of need box. It's more, how could we just design what we do in a different way to reach the same end? And the other thing I think we could do more is just share some good practice about how to remove those barriers in a way that's just very practical. You know, this works. We hadn't really thought about it as a governing body, but of course, once we realised that we were, you know, excluding by our conversation before the meeting, or we were excluding because of the devices we assumed everyone had, if we could just step back from some of the very simple things, I think we could make progress. We could do a lot around the language. You know, we could consciously de-jargon our conversations.
Elizabeth, I want you to pause on that point now, because I'm going to come back and ask specifically about that. So come back to you on that. But where you got to is a wonderful segue into another question that's come in that, do we have any practical advice on recruiting young governors? And this is really pertinent. And one of the things that really stood out to me in the NGA governance survey was that we have more governors over the age of 80 than we do under the age of 30. So this is a perfectly pertinent question that we have here. So wonderful. Please, any advice?
it's kind of similar to what Rena was talking about earlier on, which was about demystifying kind of what governance is and the role of governors. Is for me personally, I talk about governance everywhere, and I talk about being a governor everywhere. So like any situation I can just weasel that in, I will, because a lot of people don't know what it is, and it's getting that promotion out there and kind of saying, oh, I do this. Have you thought about doing this? And I talk to people in my social settings, in my social groups about it, because I want to encourage more people. I only found out about governance and became a governor because a couple of years ago, my sister was a governor, just on the off chance. If it wasn't because she was that, and I saw that and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting what you're doing there. I wouldn't have gotten into it because it's not something that's widely publicized. You know about it if you know about it. If you're within the circles or within the areas, then yes, you're aware of it. But if you're not, you might hear about it on the off chance, but think, oh, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have anything to input and bring to that. But I think just kind of demystifying the whole governance is a great first step, and it's stuff that we can all do individually. You don't have to wait for a platform or you wait for a campaign or something to come out. You can just do it in your everyday lives.
Wonderful, thank you, Abalede. Anybody else to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Abalede said. I also think that we should start to promote governance as something for young professionals as a career progression enhancement tool. You know, I think a lot of organisations offer voluntary days as part of contracts and packages for staff. I think we should be encouraging young professionals to use those days as part of CPD and enhancement. We should be thinking about if young people are going to college or university, about the soft transferable skills that they're going to need around organisational management, teamwork, leadership, and how a role in governance could perhaps enhance some of those skills and be complementary, almost as forms of work experience. So, for example, we're really trying to encourage local universities here in teacher training to encourage people to become a young governor, because actually that really helps to support their own professional development into a career in teaching or in social sciences, for example, to really consider perhaps whether their research is situated in particular areas like people premium. Could they become part of the board and develop an expertise in that area whilst also gaining valuable skills and knowledge from that? And I definitely think that Abalede is right in the sense that demystifying the role of a governor as a sort of older people that sit around a table in the evening and make lots of complicated decisions or use lots of high-level thinking and jargon is the first step in encouraging young people to think about applying to boards, but also to empower young people to see their educational experience as a driver for contributing on a board. The fact that they have been through the education system in recent times, many of them might have faced issues around the pandemic or have grown up in deprived areas or faced issues around the cost of living crisis. In what ways could we encourage our alumni students from different schools to come back and to start thinking about roles in governance? One of the things I also try and do in one of the schools we have that I'm a governor at is go into their student leadership interviews, be a governor on the student leadership panel, and talk to them about how the skills they're developing now in student councils could lead to roles like governance in the future, getting them to come in and present to the board as a student group about what they've done throughout the year and experience that board environment. So some of the basic kind of student engagement tactics that schools might use actually could be really useful to incorporate into board kind of cycles of business, and actually by young people seeing what happens and how decisions are made and how that reflects similarly to their kind of school student councils is also a great way, I think, in trying to inspire the younger generations at an early level to have a real diverse interest in their education from whatever particular area they are passionate about.
Wonderful, thank you, Carol. There was a comment that's come in that's just saying thank you for demystifying the point about demystifying the role, and you know their experience has been about in their neck of the woods. There's no element of open competition or advertisement of the role. It's about the word of mouth process, who you know, and again that process often lacks diversity. So it's a really important thing that we get that out there. So thank you everybody for contributing onto that. Okay, so I'm going to change gears a little bit here, and I'm going to ask what might be a little bit more of a controversial question. So, can we really remove barriers to governance while governance is a voluntary role?
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm going to. Yes,
Please,
of course we
go for it,
can.
Rena.
Of course we can. Yes, we can remove barriers. So through, I mean, I think in some ways we have answered part of this question by talking about flexible participation. Other things we can do, as well as, you know, providing the training and resources, is more informal things as well, buddying our prospective governors up with people who have done it for a while. You know, remember also, children are always asked. I mean, I'm a governor at a primary, so children are always asked by their parents, "What did you do today?" "Oh, someone came in." You know, who came in? And we in our governing body, we go in. So we have a governor who works for TfL, and she goes into the geography class and does some map reading sessions every now and again. We've got another lady who works in robotics, and she's gone into, you know, one of their classes. And so naturally, you know, again, it speaks to Abolade's point earlier around getting the word out. The children are then like, "Oh, you know, governor came into my class and it was so and so's mum," because obviously you have no identity when you're in a school, you're only someone's parent, and so yeah, it's just another way. But yes, we can remove barriers to governance. I think we just have to be a bit more deliberate and very active about seeking to diversify that pool, and actually target proactively underrepresented groups, you know, including parents and people from various backgrounds and communities, and also I think acknowledging the work that governors do. I think there's a lot of work that goes in, but I don't know how much celebration and acknowledgement publicly actually goes on to and again, further to Abolade's point, to just keep that profile going all the time, so that, you know, it eventually becomes something that people are recognizing, want to be a part of. They can see the positive impact it's having. You know, and just on a slightly aside point, it's really important that a governing body they've got their finger on the pulse of what the local community issues are as well. This is a bit of a segue to your question, but I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was at the House of Commons, and there was a discussion around county lines and how there's at least 27,000 children involved in county lines. And when you look at the exclusion rate from schools, there's a direct correlation between exclusions and children who are vulnerable entering into county lines. And then when you look at the racial representation, it's like the latest data from the Department of Education shows that 5 in every 10,000 white children are excluded versus 12 in every 10,000 black children. And there is race, you know, related themes here all the way along. So we've got to be asking those questions of who is sitting around the table when these exclusion cases are being discussed. You know, where is the representation? If you don't have it in your community, you need to go out and seek it. So you actually do need to target particular groups to bring them onto your board, and you need to know what's going on in your community. And I must apologize, Adrian, because I'm not even sure if I've answered your question.
No, that's a great question. It's a great answer. It's a great answer. It's a very open question. Thank you so much. There was a lot there, and I think you're right in that. Yes, we can do that, and there's a lot that we can talk about there. And I'm not going to witter on anymore. So, Abolade, would you like to contribute anything to that question?
Yes, I would say that I'll answer it in a slightly different way. If we can't remove all the barriers, does that mean that we stop talking about it? Yes, the end goal is to remove all of the barriers and make it more accessible for everyone. But if you make it more accessible for one person, that still has a massive effect. That's one life change, because that might go on to change the life of another child. So don't necessarily look at it just because we can't remove all the barriers. Oh, let's just kind of sweep under the carpet. We just keep pushing and pushing, because bit by bit, if it's not now, if it's in 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, you're still making a difference. And we just need to carry on with the momentum rather than just saying, oh, well, we're not going to solve that problem, sweep on the carpet, move on.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really pertinent point to drive home. If we think back 5 years, we weren't having these conversations. Look how far we've come in the last 12 months alone, never mind over the last 3. So it's really pertinent to remember that it's about the journey and putting one foot in front of the other. Diversity, equity and inclusion is a really complex problem, and it's been going on since time began, really, and we're not going to solve it in our lifetimes completely. So I think, Other Lady, you bringing us back to that point is a real key point, and one of focus to let us know that, yes, there's a lot to do, but look at how much progress that we're making. So thank you. Right, I'm going to ask you all for one either key question or key bit of experience or advice that we should be asking our governing boards to hold ourselves to account in the area of improving diversity. So I'm going to start with Elizabeth. One thing, please.
So we should all be asking the question, who are we not attracting? And do we know why? And what does that mean?
Wonderful. Right. Would you care to expand a little bit on that, please?
Yes, certainly. So, and I think this goes right back to the point about barriers. So, first of all, it's a question of, again, making sure that as governing bodies, we're looking at who we are, who makes us up. And we think really, really carefully about who's not amongst us. So what voices aren't we hearing? And it's absolutely the point about, and what does that say about our link with the community? We should look at, you know, if we've lost people, we should look at why we've lost them. You know, be quite open with ourselves about why do we think we're not retaining governors we could have retained, because we've lost some talent there. What could we do differently another time? What did we pick up? Did we even ask them? You know, what put them off? What could we do? What could we do to learn from others to make a difference, to move forward? And I think, you know, it's very important, that point about making this manageable. We can't pretend societal barriers don't exist. So let's not try and do that. But what we can do is work collectively. We can work with governors for schools, and we can work across our local authorities. We can work with partner schools in sort of benchmarked networks. We can certainly work with parents. So again, I think we need to be quite specific about what are our own local problems, but what are the wider solutions that we can tap into to move forward, and then be very strategic about how do we think we can make a difference to our profile and our way of working in the next 1, 3, 5 years. Let's not pretend we can do it all at once, otherwise we've just got exhausted.
Wonderful. So much there. I've learned so much just listening for the last couple
Can
of
I give
minutes.
you one practical example? And so I'm a disabled person. It's exhausting for me to travel, you know, to commute much. But when I first became a governor, you know, I work for governors for schools, but the rule in London is we have to place you quite a long way from home, because we've got, you know, we've got more supply of volunteers than we've got demand. And I went with that because, you know, that was the advice. But I did find it exhausting. I ended up with a commute to the school. Next time round, I approached governors for schools and said, look, my governor term is about to expire. Can we please this time do something where you could place me much nearer home? Now, governors for schools was wonderful about it, absolutely wonderful. And we've come up with a brilliant solution. But you know, thinking about it, why did I not myself challenge that barrier in the first place? Well, because I'm so used to fitting in. How, you know, what I can't remember now. Does it even say on the governor's schools application form, you know, do you have an access issue? Can we help you a bit more? I'll repeat again, the you know, big shout out, governors for schools was wonderful once I said I had a need, but that was when I was an experienced governor and I felt confident enough to do so. So, you know, there's a bit of redesign there. It could help somebody else in a similar position.
Elizabeth, that's beautiful, because that perfectly illustrates one of the points that we've been talking about earlier. People feel like, oh, I can't do this, or I can't say this because I don't know how this all works. Actually, we've got to, empower people to speak up about their rights and say, actually, no, this is what I need for this to be able to be a reality for me and for me to take part.
Exactly, and it's also why I raised the point about, are we digging deep into the people we're losing as governors? Are we asking them to be honest about their experience? Are we being very off-putting? Are they saying, perhaps, I'm really sorry, my job has changed, but is there something else going on there where we've been off-putting and the person's decided, I just can't contribute?
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing insights with a real practical example and a practical solution. So thank you for sharing that with us. Dan, I'm going to come to you next.
Can I have 2 questions? Is that just very quick ones?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So my first one would be something along the lines of, is the constitution of your board doing justice to the students in the classroom? Would probably be my first one. My second one is, are we still actively recruiting even if we don't have vacancies? Because we need to start creating talent pools of governors. We have it in lots of other sectors. Lots of industry have talent pools. Amongst alumni, as Callum said earlier, alumni would be really powerful. They know the governors. And then you can have a slow integration and initiation into the life of the school if you've got a talent pool, or associate governors, I think Brina termed them, which is an amazing term. Because a homogenous board is a fragile board, isn't it? So yeah, they've been my 2.
Thank you, Dan. Great reflection and great practical advice again there. Alan?
I think my question would be, when evaluating your methods of inquiry on boards to hold your schools to account, do the questions continue to seem the same and cover the same issues? If I went to bed with my governor hat on, the issue of accountability would keep me up at night, thinking about, when I read the minutes, or if someone else read the minutes outside of the board, would they look at the minutes and say, this board is diverse, and therefore the questioning of data, of evidence, of strategy is representative, is critical, and it robustly holds people in the school to account. So I think that encourages us not to be unconsciously incompetent. I love that phrase, not being aware of the things that we're not aware of. And if we could move to a space where we were maybe consciously incompetent, we understood and knew the things that we weren't so good at, then I think we would be able to start thinking about changing diversity. So being aware of how we're holding the school to account through the voices that we're seeing coming out, and a practical way to do that would be to read the minutes, and encourage people to go over the minutes, encourage governing board members to go back and look at their questions. Where did they contribute the most? Where didn't they contribute? And why is that? Is that because of the language, of the way things are presented? If you've got a diverse board, are you potentially not allowing people to participate because of particular ways in which you're presenting data, or because you're not you're not providing enough support for those people to feel empowered to ask those questions? But then also looking at it and going, okay, we're not actually asking deep, rich, meaningful questions. That must be perhaps because of the board composition and the voices. What could we do in order to change the way we're asking those questions? Who would we need on the board to ask the questions that we think would be quality questions to hold the schools to account?
Wonderful reflection there, Callum. And I've certainly got my cogs turning about how we can do that in my day job. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Adelaide, over to you.
My question would be, why? Why are we looking at diversity? Are we just looking at it as a tick box exercise because it's something that, it's a hot topic, we need to do it? So asking why. We're looking at diversity because we want a more diverse board, but is the culture of the governing body ready for that? What kind of culture do you have? Is it a welcoming culture? Is it going to allow creative discussion? And appropriate challenge, or is it a bit of a hostile board and we just defer to two people within the board that have all the answers and do all of the thinking, and we just, yep, that's great, as long as they're happy with that, that's what we're going to do. So just asking yourselves and your governing body, why are we discussing this? What are our motivations? Are they genuine, or are they just ticking a box?
Yeah, that's a real powerful motivator. The why. Why are we doing this? Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for that, Rena.
So just kind of, it touches a little bit on Callum's point earlier, but I would say, how are you regularly assessing progress in promoting inclusivity in your school community? What are your measures, and what are the mechanisms that you've got in place to review as well? So somebody has to be accountable for it, and the whole kind of discussion or the understanding around diversity and inclusion in your school needs to include what the parents think, what the children think. That might be surveys, it might be other types of feedback, but what are your regular mechanisms for assessment? How are you benchmarking it? How are you measuring yourself against these, and making sure that there is action after every kind of bit of data gathering that you've done?
Wonderful, thank you, Rena. Now, I've got a whole host of further questions, but we're getting close to time. So I'm going to get you to sum up the following question. And I want you to think about, is there one key thing that you would like to see in terms of answering this question? So where next for diversity, equity, and inclusion in reference to governance? So I'm going to start with Callum this time.
Great question, and I think it ties in a little bit to what Rena was saying, because I wanted to jump in on the end of that as well. So I think we need to obviously look at the makeup of our boards and consider to what extent sort of the homogeneity of the boards are at risk to our operation of governance. I definitely think if it's not in our risk register about diversity of boards, then it definitely should be. If we can recognise that our board is perhaps too homogenous and recognise the local context of the board, add that to our risk register as a factor that affects school operation, effectiveness and governance, that would be fantastic. And it links very much to what Rena was saying around, it made me think of review and questioning what boards do to review their own effective practice, particularly in the trust, when you're asked to provide a skills audit of the board to the trust. I think sometimes we can forget that boards have a responsibility as well to review themselves and see where they can improve. And should that be done by themselves? Should someone external be doing that? So thinking about who's reviewing, how we're reviewing, and how that builds into maintaining and mitigating the risk of having a homogenous group of people on the board. So yeah, looking at the makeup of our boards and considering and reflecting what skills and demographics and experiences we need, and who makes that decision. Are we the best people as a board that is maybe from a similar background to make that decision? And if not, who would we be going to have a robust review of what our makeup looks like and what is best for us? Because I think sometimes we forget about reviewing our own practice because we're so busy reviewing everything else, and we expect the trust to handle sometimes all of the workings of the board and the makeup. Actually, it might be useful to have outsider perspective on what our makeup looks like, and we might not be the best people to make that review happen.
Thank you, Callum. Wonderful. I'm going to go to Adelaide next.
I think it's just, my answer would be the point that I've been trying to make. We don't always have to look at it as a massive context and look at it in the greater sense of the entire of the country. And you could look at it at just the context of your school board. Don't be frightened by it and think, oh, this is such a huge topic, we can't make a difference, there's nothing we can do here, we'll just wait until it's compulsory and then we'll just do some bits. Just little actions, little bit by bit, that is really what keeps the momentum going. And I think that's what people need to remember a lot of the times. It's just the actions you can do within your school board that would make the difference.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Elizabeth?
I'd say we need to think about this as part and parcel of what we already do on governing bodies, but with a different lens. It would be very helpful to have some toolkits and some case studies and some encouraging examples of where barriers have been broken down. But what I particularly like governing boards to do is think about this as part and parcel as business as usual on the board. It's just applying a different angle. We should be doing board effectiveness well anyway. We should be self-evaluating anyway. We should be doing good inductions and good planning. This is another aspect of what we're there to do.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Rena?
I would say just critically challenging, how are we achieving equity in educational outcomes? So right at the beginning of the conversation, we started talking about the difference between equality and equity, and we've got to look at addressing the systemic disparities that exist, and really looking at the data and drilling down which children are struggling, which where are they, what are they struggling with, and what are we doing to address the systemic disparities that they're experiencing so that we can create more positive outcomes for them.
Thank you very much, Rena. Wise words there. Dan?
You've done it again, Adrian. Like, how do I add to this? I suppose education's so innovative and exciting, isn't it? And governance feels a little bit like it's playing catch up. And I suppose some of the conversations we have in education are around like doing an audit of our culture as a school, doing an audit of our of what is the pulse in this organisation. And I think coming back to the fact that as governors, as trustees, as board members, we're a critical friend to challenge and support. We need to be holding that light to ourselves as well, and saying, would we be able to do this in every single facet of school life? Can we, in good conscience, support every demographic of student, and can we support head teachers effectively if we're not a diverse board? Because actually you have far less credibility if you're not a diverse board, and as we know, primary school head teachers have so many hats to wear. Actually, how are we able to support them if it's homogeneity on top of one person? And I think it's interesting, isn't it? We need to change people's view of schooling. We need to reach out to them, because previously held poor views of schooling are the people we need in governance to be in those PECS panel meetings, to be in those conversations and have that seat at the table. People, I think Abalade said earlier, with no qualifications or fewer qualifications, are the people that need to be involved in those strategic conversations about supporting students with data. So I think it is a real audit of school life and the culture of the governance board, and are they reflective and are they purposeful?
Thank you so much, Dan. You did an amazing job there, considering you drew the short straw again. And my apologies for that. I didn't consciously do that. Thank you, everybody on the panel. It's been an amazing hour, and it's flown by. And I had so many more questions to ask, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. So in conclusion, I'd just like to thank everybody on Governance for Schools' behalf for the rich and diverse conversation, no pun intended there. But the one thing that I really wanted to draw together from this evening's conversation was, it's amazing to hear about the great work that everybody's doing and the diverse lenses that we're looking at this approach through. So everybody here brought something different to the table, and that essentially is what we're talking about. And therein sums up the importance of diverse boards.